So in this video, I want to just give you a quick tutorial on how to do example 1 in our vectors assignment. So we have Anna that walks 90 meters due east, and then she walks 50 meters due north, and we'd like to represent those two vectors as a tip-to-tail method listed as D1 and D2, and then we're going to also show the resultant vector D. Okay, so let's go into GlowScript. All right, and I've opened up GlowScript here, created a program, and we want to create a vector. The best way to represent a vector is to, and I'll just show you, it's just simply an arrow. So if you go up to Google GlowScript and arrow, you can see that this is the way you can represent your arrow and all this sort of interesting information that you can use. So that's sort of the normal syntax that we have for, I'm just going to copy that over here. We put that onto one line here. And so instead of arrow, I'm just going to call that D1. We're going to start this first vector at the origin, so 0, 0, so that's the initial position of it. Shaft width, we can just leave it as 1 for now. The axes, so it's not axis length, we'll just leave it as axes. And this right now is set as a vector that's going to go 5 units to the right, nothing along the y, and nothing along the z. But in our coding assignment, we want to actually make sure it goes 90 meters due east, so just let's say 90 units to the right. So that means we're going to change that 5 to a 90. Let's just run the program to take a look at what it looks like. There's our first vector, D1. So next thing we need to do is we're going to do another vector, D2. We're just going to copy that line, change that to a D2. We want to make sure that now she walks 50 meters due north. And let's show that as that vector. So let's go over here, D2. And what would we change if we wanted to go 15 units upwards? Well, we don't want to go 90 to the right. We want to go actually just nothing to the right, but we want to go upwards, which is this y coordinate. We're going to change to a 50. So we run the program now. You can see, oh, there's your arrow going straight up. But if we want to show a tip-to-tail method, we might move this vector here so that its tail is now at the tip of our first vector. So how would we do that in GlowScript? How would we make D2's vector start at the tail of D1? Well, you see that this one ended at 90, so that means that this one should begin at 90. So if we change the position of this to be 90 here, you can see now we've just simply shifted this over 90 units to the right. Okay. Now let's copy this once more, and we're going to create our resultant vector, which we'll call D. Now D is going to start at the origin, but we would like it so that it goes to the very tail, or sorry, very tip of our last vector D2. So the axis needs to be changed. Right now this is just pointing straight up at 50 units. We want it to kind of point diagonally up. We're going to go 50 to the right, 90 to the right and 50 up. That means this x now becomes 90 and the y becomes 50. So if you look at it, we're simply just adding the x coordinates, adding the y coordinates, and adding the z coordinates. And that's how you can add vectors. It's much easier to add them when they're all broken up into their components. So if I run the program now, you can see that I've got this nice vector out. Okay, so now by the way, another thing you could change up here, as was mentioned in class earlier today, one of my students noticed that you could just change this axis vec and just say, well, really, you're just adding these two up. So you could just say d1.axes plus d2.axes. So you're taking the attributes of this, you're simply adding these two vectors. So you would do 90 plus 0, which is going to be 90, and 0 plus 50, which is going to be 50, and 0 plus 0 gives you 50. So this is another way to simply just do that add instead of you mentally doing that. So if you have lots of vectors to add, you can do it that way. So you get the same answer here. Also, suppose you change this vector D1 to be like an 80. Does that give you the right answer? Let's check it out. Now this becomes 80 instead of 90. And I run it and it's, ooh, well this is kind of showing up maybe right, but the vector over here wasn't drawn correctly. Why is that so? If you look at it, this has become 80, but then I've positioned this vector at 90. So another thing you could do is you could change the position of vector D2 to be starting at D1.axes so that its initial position, so the tail of D2 is going to be starting at the tip of D1's vector. That's what we're doing by doing this. So now that would fix the problem where the vectors were not joined up together. So going back to the original setup, we're going to change that 80 to a 90. And so we can see that we have our nice program, our nice tip-to-tail vectors being added here. Okay, one more thing that was asked in this assignment was to print text and say, what is her displacement? So we need to find the resultant of our vector. So when we run it here, we know that this is 90 units to the right and this is 50 units up. How do we find the resultant, the hypotenuse of this triangle? There's a couple ways of doing that. So we're going to be putting a statement in here, print, let's say her displacement is, and we're going to be doing a calculation in here, right? So meters and close that bracket. So what are we going to put in the brackets in between these two commas here? How do we calculate the resultant of that? Now, if you're just doing sort of regular math, you might remember that it's just Pythagorean theorem. So you could do square root of, well, it's the x component squared, which is 90. Remember, squared, you can't do this. You have to do star star and then 2. That's the power of 2. Plus, it's 50 squared. So you're doing really a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And the square root of that gives you the resultant of that. So if you run the program, we should get a resultant of our displacement of 102.956. Now, there are other ways that are built into GlowScript that you can do it. So you don't have to do all this math and put in these manual numbers in here. You can let it, let's suppose if you change these numbers around yourself, so you can let this be computed and not have to keep changing all the pieces in the code. So if you go into, let's see, GlowScript and type in vector math, all right, and here you can see that there's a bunch of, under the first hit, there's a bunch of things that you can do. You can add vectors, v1 plus v2, and it's adding up the x components and the y components. You can see 10 plus 1, 20 plus 2, and 3 plus 30. All right, you could subtract vectors. You can multiply by a scalar. But to me, other things that maybe you don't learn in high school at this point, like normalization of vectors, but this magnitude in here. You can do the magnitude over here by using this function mag and then the vector. So if I go into my GlowScript, I can actually, instead of using this function, I can type in mag of, and initially I just did d, thought that would work, right? It knows d is a vector, and so I just run this and I get basically an undefined error. So the problem is I need to tell what I'm taking a magnitude of. I'm taking the magnitude of the axes, so it has to be magnitude d dot axes. And so if I run this now, you should see hopefully the same answer I got before. All right, so now that if I go through and I change these numbers up here in my vectors, it's going to compute it correctly without me changing the formula down here. Okay, that's it for this example.